Welcome to Power Channel TV, your opportunity each week to spend a little time with Briggs & Stratton talking about innovation, marketing, or technical topics. My name is John Piechowski. I'm the Customer Education Director here at Briggs & Stratton. Today's topic, EFI software overview and installation. If you watched last week's episode, you got an opportunity to see Tom Billigan, our training manager here at Briggs & Stratton, talk about the different diagnostic options available to you to work on our EFI engines. Tom will continue a series on the hardware side of the EFI system, talking about each component in the EFI system and how to walk through the diagnostic flow chart for it. This week I'm starting a series on the EFI software. We'll start at the basics and get into some of the more complicated topics in the coming weeks. The first thing I want to cover, what's in the box. So if I grab one of the EFI Technician Assistant boxes, part number 19628, retail cost $160, and if I open up the box, there are two items in the box. We have the EFI cable. This is the cable that goes from the engine to your laptop or computer using a USB port. And then we have a box with a flash drive in it. The flash drive contains the software as well as the installation guide to help you walk through the installation. Now you might ask, why are you sending the software on a flash drive? Well, we know a lot of newer laptops don't have CD drives in them, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you the best, easiest way to get it installed regardless of the software or the computer that you're installing it on. So insert the flash drive into your machine, and then we'll take a look at what that process looks like. So if we switch over to the computer, to start out, I'm going to open up the flash drive, and we'll see on the flash drive we have two installation files. We'll talk about those in a moment. And we have the installation instructions. If I open up the installation instructions, I'll walk through those instructions so that we can review a little bit how that all works. We start out, we have two sections identifying your computer's operating system and then installing the Technician Assistant. If I go on to the next page, we have installing, walking through your computer's operating system itself. So to identify your computer's operating system, it walks through the steps. Left click on the Windows icon, right click on your computer, and choose Properties. The important thing is that you will get to a dialog that looks like this, and they've highlighted in the documentation for you, the instructions, what you're looking for. And you're simply looking for, is it 32-bit or is it 64-bit Windows operating system? Once I know that, I'll note that for the installation. And then if I scroll down, it walks through how to actually perform the installation. We'll open up my computer. We'll click on the flash drive on the left side of the Explorer that opens. And then, like they mentioned in the manual, and I'll go back to the flash drive to show you, we have an install kit for 32-bit and another one for 64-bit. Based on the version of Windows that you saw when you looked, you will double-click on the appropriate install kit. It will then begin the installation. Simply click Next. You'll enter your username and organization. Click Next again. And then you'll finally confirm the settings and click the Install button. Also, another important note, you'll see a device driver installation wizard start as well. They show the screenshots in the manual. This is the driver that allows us to communicate with the cable itself. So if this installation is not completed or fails, the software itself will not run because it will not be able to communicate with the cable. Finally, we'll finish the installation by clicking Finish, and at that point the software is installed and ready to go. So the next thing we'll take a look at is running the software for the first time. And before we get to that, I wanted to cover a couple of basic things that are important. The first one is that in order for the software to run, you must have the cable plugged into your computer. So if you try to run the software without the cable connected, you'll get an error message. I'll actually show you what that looks like in a moment. But with the cable connected, we'll open up the software, and then ultimately when we open the software, we'll walk through some of the features in it. So I'm going to start by plugging in the cable. Once we have the cable plugged into our laptop, then we're going to go ahead and run the software. So the first thing I want to do is show you what that error message looks like if I try to run the software without the cable connected. You'll see that I get an error message and it says unsuccessful finding devices. And really what it's saying is it couldn't find the cable and therefore it cannot start the software. So you do need the cable plugged in order to run the software. When you click OK on this message, it will simply close the software, and then once you connect the cable you can relaunch the software. I also want to touch on where you find the software once it's installed, and then we'll go ahead and run it. So the first thing you'll do is click on your Windows button and you'll find a folder called Briggs & Stratton. And in that folder you'll see EFI Technician Assistant. And when you click that, that is what will launch the software. So I'll go ahead and launch the software. We'll see the Electronic Fuel Injection Technician Assistant logo light up while it's loading the software. And then once it loads, we've now got the software loaded and we're ready to start using it. Before we get into it, I'll cover a few of the common buttons and what they do. First, the most important ones are at the very top left. We have a green connect button and a red stop or disconnect button. Those are the buttons you would use to connect to the engine and disconnect from the engine or the ECM. An important note here, the ECM does need to be powered, so you need to have key on, ignition on before you click connect in order to actually make the connection, because the ECM needs to be powered. Now before I connect, I want to just cover the tabs that go across the top of the software, give you a high-level idea of what each of those do, and then we'll connect. So we have a dashboard, which would typically be used for real-time diagnostics and information about the engine as it's running. We have a logging tab that allows us to log information for review later. We have a charting tab that allows me to load those log files and view them. I can graph them, and I can graph different parameters against other parameters. We have a fault codes tab, which we'll take a deeper look at today. And then we have the ECM flash tab, which allows us to flash a new calibration onto an ECM. And I'll talk a little bit more about that yet today as well. So with that done, I'm going to power on my engine, or key on ignition. And today I'm using one of our EFI training boards as our engine. And once I have it keyed on, I will click the connect button. You will see it go through the process of connecting. And this is a good time for me to talk a little bit about how the software works. So you'll see a message on the screen. It says calibration is out of date. Now there are a couple of things that the software does automatically for you so that you don't have to manually do them. The first thing is when you load the software, it automatically goes out to the internet, assuming you have an internet connection active, and looks for a new calibration database and downloads it to your machine. The important part for that is once it's downloaded, you can go out in the field without an internet connection. Maybe you've got a customer in the field that you're going to go out and service, and you'll be able to update the calibration on their engine in the field with no internet connection once that updated database is down. The other thing the software does, as we saw when I loaded, is it automatically notifies you when you've connected to an engine whose calibration is out of date. Now the calibration is the set of instructions that is on the ECM that tells the engine how to run in different environments and different settings. So that new calibration will be loaded onto the ECM when you answer yes. So again, first connect to the engine. It will always check the calibration and notify you if there's a new one. Now if we go back to the software, we'll walk through the process a little bit. First thing is if I click yes here, it will automatically begin the update calibration process. It takes about 30 seconds. For today, we're not going to walk through that. So I will answer no to this question. And when I do, it pops up another message. Now this one tells us that the calibration was not updated. Makes sense because I clicked no. It also tells me there are history DTCs present on the engine. So let's talk a moment about current DTCs and historical DTCs. Current DTCs are the ones that are currently active on the engine. When I key on, whatever the fault is that caused that DTC to appear is there and current at the moment. Historical DTCs are ones that have happened on the engine but may not be current. In other words, they're not currently a problem, but they happened at some point since the last time they were cleared. Where that's helpful for you to understand is if a customer brings a unit in, you can look at historical DTCs to see if they had a problem in the field before they brought it in, but for some reason it's disappeared as you're troubleshooting or diagnosing the engine. So it's always good to know and understand what those are. That's part of the reason the software immediately lets you know if those DTCs are present. So let's take a look at what a DTC looks like and how to walk through it. So we'll go back to the software. And once we're back at the software, I'll click OK on the note that came up, and you'll notice the software immediately takes me to the Fault Codes tab, which is where I can see all of those diagnostic trouble codes that might be happening. It took me immediately to the Historical button, showing me that I have a 351 code, which is on coil number 1. Now the reason that code is there is because I disconnected coil number 1 so that we could walk through the demonstration here. One of the things that's nice for you as a technician is that anytime there's a code, current or historical, we will give you a link for more information that will give you the details about the electrical schematic associated with the component, as well as the diagnostic flowchart to walk through a diagnosis of that particular fault. Now again, remember that I mentioned current and historical codes. If I click on the current button, you'll notice that I have no current codes. And the reason for that is that my coil is now working properly. But again, historical code, I see it there. Now I want to talk a little bit about clearing codes. So when we clear codes in the system, the important thing for you to note is that it will clear both current and historical codes. So you'll want to make sure that you note the codes down that are historical before you clear them, in case at some point in the future you want to be able to reference what code existed before you cleared the code. Once we clear them, it will walk us through the entire process of power cycling the ECM and then reconnecting. So let's go ahead and go back to the software and we'll take a look at clearing codes process. So I'll click clear. It immediately cleared the codes, and you'll notice that it tells us to turn the ECM off. So I will key off my ignition. I'll wait, and it will prompt me again, letting me know that it has seen the ECM power down and disappear. Be certain that it's off for 5 seconds, it says. After 5 seconds, key the ignition back on. I typically like to wait until I hear the fuel pump cycle, which gives me enough time to know that the ECM is completely up, and then I'll click the OK button. We'll see it reconnect to the computer, and then once it reconnects to the ECM, we can go check those codes, and we can see that both historical codes and current codes are now gone. Now the last thing I want to mention on the Fault Codes tab is this Search Database option. This is a great tool for you as a technician. If you know that a customer had a historical code but it's cleared, or you read it with a tiny scan but now you want to do some research on that code and it doesn't exist on the engine you're on, Search Database will bring up a list of every single code that is possible and allow you to click it and get to that same diagnostic flow chart that you could if the code was historical or current, and then walk through that diagnostic flow chart. So it's a good way for you to be able to look at each code and know what's going on with it. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and do a quick review of what we talked about, and then we'll take a look at downloading the software. So we talked about what's in the box, the software installation and walking through that process, what that looks like and some of the things that you need to do. Remember, the installation instructions are on the flash drive to help walk you through the entire process. And then we talked about reading and clearing codes and also using the Search Database option that allows you to look up a code and the diagnostic flowchart associated with it. The last thing that I want to do is talk about downloading the software on the Power Portal. Now before we walk into looking at that, there is one important thing I want to note, which is that remember that the software is only useful if you have a cable that you purchased, again, that part number 19628. Without the cable, the software won't load. So you can download the software and install it, but it's really of no use unless you have that cable. The reason we make it available on the Power Portal is that as we release new versions of the software, that's where you'll go to download that new version and get it. Final important note on that is that new versions will include new functionality, but that calibration database that I talked about earlier, remember that automatically updates itself, so you never have to be concerned about going to the portal to get a new calibration for one of the engines you might be working on, rather only for new versions of the software. So with that, let's go back to the laptop and we'll take a look at where to find the information about the software. So if I go to the Briggs & Stratton tab under Technical Information, I can see the EFI Resources page, and I've already loaded it up so that we can take a look at it. On the top, we have our EFI Service and Diagnostics PDF, the diagnostic manual that you can download so that you have it available. And we also provide the CE part number that you can purchase from your source of supply. We have a link to all the service tools and service manual for the engine. And then right below it, we provide you information about the software. We give you a copy of the install instructions, as well as the current version of 32-bit and 64-bit of the software. We also give you some instructions on where to find your current version so that you know if there's an update that you need to download. It doesn't make any sense, or it's not helpful to you to spend time downloading it unless indeed you need a new version. So we give you the new version. One important note is if you already have a cable, I will tell you there is no new version of the software. The version that came in the box is the current version. So this is out there as future planning as we release new versions, but no need for you to go through that process and check it now. In the future, that's the place to go. So hopefully this has been a great overview for you on the installation of the software and also reading and clearing fault codes. We'll give you a couple of minutes to enter some questions and then be back with you to see if we can answer those for you. Welcome back to Power Channel TV. Again, we'll take some of your questions before we finish up for the day. Looks like the first question I've got is coming in from Tom in Alabama. What happens if I clear a code and the code returns when I reconnect to the ECM? Well, good question, Tom. Remember I talked about current codes and historical codes. Current codes in our engines are first-time fault codes. In other words, if you clear it and you reconnect to the ECM and you see the code again, it means the code is still present. Whatever defect in the system is causing the code to raise, that issue is still there and you should follow the diagnostic flowchart. Next one we've got coming in from Robbie. Is it recommended to have an internet connection in the field to feed back to you for assistance? And then a follow-up question, is the cable the same as the one you get with the home generator dongle? So let's take the first question first. Is it recommended to have an internet connection? Robbie, in the field, no need to have an internet connection when you're doing diagnostics. The typical way we might engage you for additional support or assistance would be to have you use that logging feature. It'll actually be covered in an upcoming episode, so we'll talk a little bit more about it in the future. But that would be the use, and when you get back to the office, you would share that log file with us. Second question, is it the same cable as the home generator sets? It is not the same cable. Our EFI engines are based on a Delphi system that use a different communication than do the home generator systems that also have EFI software. So this software kit, the 19628 kit, is specific to Briggs & Stratton Vanguard EFI engines. Next one we've got coming in from Stefan in Antioch. Will there be a version for Linux or Android? Stefan, right now I can tell you we're not working on a version for Linux or Android. At the moment, we're planning only a Windows version. I can't tell you that that will not change in the future, but at the moment, it's Windows specific. Next one, we've got Kelly from Lake Havasu. How many laptop computers can the software be installed on? Great question, Kelly. The way we've set this up from a licensing standpoint is that you can install the software on as many computers as you want. Remember, you're only able to use the software with the cable attached, so it's really the cable that limits your use of it. So you can install it on, say, 5 laptops that you have in your shop, and then whoever has the cable and plugs it in is the one that's able to use the software itself. So hopefully that answers the question for you. Michael from Long Island, on what brands will you see the Briggs & Stratton EFI? Well, I'll admit, Michael, I don't know all the brands, but we'll see it, I know, on Snapper Pro and Ferris. We've got some coming out for Hustler. I know Alto's is using it, and if I remember correctly, Husqvarna. So we've got a number of manufacturers using it, and I'm sure more coming each day. Well, it looks like that's all of our questions for the day. Again, thanks for joining us for Power Channel TV. We appreciate you taking a little time on a Friday afternoon to spend with us. We look forward to seeing you on future episodes.